Before we explore one of history's most dramatic turning points, the fall of the world's greatest city, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. This is a story of empires, innovation, faith, and the moment that changed the world forever. Don't miss our deep dives into history's most pivotal moments. The morning of May 29, 1453, dawned with an eerie silence over Constantinople. For 53 days, the thunder of Ottoman cannons had shaken the massive walls that had protected the city for over 1,000 years. Now, suddenly, the bombardment had ceased. In that silence, the 7,000 defenders manning the triple fortifications knew what was coming. The final assault was at hand. Constantinople, the new Rome, the queen of cities, the jewel of Christianity, stood on the precipice of its greatest crisis. For 11 centuries, it had been considered virtually impregnable, the most sophisticated city in the world, a marvel of engineering, culture, and strategic genius. Its fall would not just mark the end of an empire, it would signal the close of the Middle Ages and the dawn of a new world order. But here's the cruel irony that makes this story so compelling. Constantinople fell, not despite its perfection, but because of it. The very things that made it great, its impregnable walls, its strategic location, its accumulated wealth, its sense of divine protection, became the instruments of its downfall. This is the story of how perfection became a prison, and how the greatest city in the world died defending an ideal it could no longer sustain. To understand Constantinople's fall, we must first grasp its magnificence. Founded by Constantine the Great in 330 CE on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, Constantinople occupied perhaps the most strategic location in the ancient world. It straddled the Bosphorus Strait, the narrow waterway connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, controlling trade routes between Europe and Asia, between north and south, between east and west. The city's geography provided natural defenses. Water protected it on 3 sides: the Sea of Marmara to the south, the Bosphorus to the east, and the Golden Horn Inlet to the north. Only on the western landward side was it vulnerable, and here the Byzantines constructed the most formidable fortifications the world had ever seen. The Theodosian walls, completed in 413 CE, consisted of 3 defensive lines: an outer wall 27 feet high, a middle wall 40 feet high, and an inner wall 40 feet high, with towers reaching 60 feet. Between each wall ran a terrace, and before the outer wall stretched a 60-foot wide moat. These weren't just walls, they were an engineering marvel that had repelled countless sieges by Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, and Rus. Inside these walls, Constantinople flourished as the richest, most cultured city in Christendom. The Hagia Sophia, completed in 537, remained the world's largest cathedral, its massive dome seemingly floating on lighter feet of engineering so advanced that it wouldn't be surpassed for nearly a millennium. The Hippodrome could seat 100,000 spectators. The Great Palace sprawled across acres, its halls decorated with mosaics and filled with mechanical wonders. Aqueducts brought fresh water, underground cisterns stored millions of gallons, and the city's population had once exceeded 500,000. But by 1453, the city that had survived for 11 centuries was a shadow of its former glory. The Fourth Crusade of 1204 had dealt it a devastating blow when Western Christians, diverted from their holy mission, sacked the city instead. Though the Byzantines reclaimed Constantinople in 1261, it never fully recovered. The empire that once stretched from Spain to Syria had contracted to little more than the city itself and a few scattered territories. By the mid-15th century, Constantinople resembled a beautiful corpse, still magnificent in appearance, but hollowed out from within. The city that once housed hundreds of thousands now contained perhaps 50,000 souls. Entire neighborhoods lay abandoned, with farms and orchards growing within the city walls. The once mighty Byzantine fleet had dwindled to a handful of ships. The treasury was empty, unable to pay for adequate defenses or hire sufficient mercenaries. Yet the Byzantines clung to their city with desperate pride. This was Constantinople, protected by God, defended by the Virgin Mary herself, unconquerable for 1,000 years. Prophecies declared that the city would stand until the end of the world. How could it fall? This confidence, this sense of divine protection and historical invincibility, was precisely what made Constantinople vulnerable. The city's leaders had become trapped by their own mythology, unable to make the pragmatic compromises that might have saved them. When the young Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, just 21 years old, began preparing for a massive assault on Constantinople in 1452, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine the 11th Palaiologos faced impossible choices. He had perhaps 7,000 defenders, 5,000 Byzantines, and 2,000 foreign volunteers, mostly Genoese and Venetian. Mehmed commanded between 80,000 and 100,000 troops. The military mathematics were brutal. Constantine begged Western Europe for help, but here the city's perfection became a curse. For centuries, Constantinople had been the bastion of Orthodox Christianity, proud of its theological correctness, disdainful of Western heresies. The Great Schism of 1054 had split Christianity into Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, and the wounds had never healed. The Pope offered help, but at a price. The Orthodox Church must submit to Rome in December 1452, in a desperate attempt to secure Western aid. A union of the churches was proclaimed in the Hagia Sophia. It was a disaster. Much of the Byzantine population, including many of the clergy, rejected the union. Better the Turkish turban than the papal tiara, declared the Grand Duke Locas, Notaras, expressing a sentiment shared by many. The city's religious perfectionism had left it isolated in its hour of greatest need. Meanwhile, Mehmed assembled the tools of a new age. He commissioned the Hungarian engineer Orban to build the largest cannon the world had ever seen, a bronze monster 27 feet long that could hurl a 1,500-pound stone ball over a mile. It took 60 oxen and 200 men to transport it. When fired, the cannon could be heard 10 miles away, and its recoil drove it backward several feet. This was more than just a big gun. It represented the triumph of gunpowder warfare over medieval fortifications. The perfect walls that had protected Constantinople for 1,000 years had been designed for an earlier age. Stone fortifications that could withstand battering rams and catapults crumbled before sustained cannon fire. On April 6, 1453, Mehmed's army surrounded Constantinople. The massive Ottoman fleet sealed off the city by sea. The siege had begun, and immediately the Byzantines faced the consequences of their geographic perfection. That strategic location, controlling the Bosphorus, guarding the gateway between continents, meant that Constantinople was impossible to relieve without naval superiority. But the Byzantine fleet was pitifully small, and potential allies were far away. The Venetians and Genoese, though they had commercial interests in Constantinople, were slow to respond. By the time any relief force could arrive, the battle would be decided. The defenders did have some advantages. The walls, though vulnerable to cannon fire, were still formidable. Giovanni Giustiniani, a Genoese soldier who arrived with 700 men, proved to be a brilliant defensive commander. The Byzantines stretched a massive chain across the Golden Horn to prevent Ottoman ships from entering the harbor, and the defenders fought with the desperation of men who knew they were making a last stand. For weeks, the siege ground on. Mehmed's cannons pounded the walls, particularly near the St. Romanus Gate, where the land walls were most vulnerable. Each night, the defenders worked frantically to repair the damage, building wooden palisades and earthworks behind the breaches. By day, they repelled assault after assault, rolling logs down on the attackers, pouring Greek fire, shooting arrows and crossbow bolts. But the defenders were exhausted, outnumbered, and running out of supplies. And Mehmed had a trick up his sleeve that exploited Constantinople's perfect defenses against themselves. The chain across the Golden Horn seemed like perfect protection. With that entrance sealed, Ottoman ships couldn't attack the city's northern sea walls, which were less heavily defended. But in April, Mehmed accomplished something that seemed impossible. He built a road of greased logs over the hills behind the Genoese colony of Galata and physically hauled 70 ships overland, around the chain, and into the Golden Horn in a single night. The strategic situation transformed. Suddenly, the defenders had to stretch their already thin forces to protect the northern walls as well. This was the curse of Constantinople's perfections: so much wall to defend, so few defenders. The 14 miles of fortifications that had protected the city for centuries now became a liability. Every breach, every potential attack point, required precious men that Constantine simply didn't have. As May progressed, the situation grew desperate. A relief fleet that the defenders hoped would arrive never came. Attempts to negotiate with Mehmed failed. The Sultan wanted the city, not tribute. The walls were crumbling under constant bombardment. The defenders were beyond exhaustion. Yet still, the city held. Despite everything, Constantinople's perfect defenses extracted a terrible price from the attackers. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers died in fruitless assaults. Mehmed's advisors urged him to lift the siege, but the young sultan was obsessed. He had staked his reputation on taking. On May 28th, Mehmed ordered a day of rest. No bombardment, no attacks. The silence was unnerving. That evening, the sultan addressed his troops, promising them 3 days of plunder. If they took the city, everything in Constantinople would be theirs. His soldiers roared their approval, and all night the Ottoman camp blazed with torches and rang with drums and cymbals. It was psychological warfare designed to terrify the defenders and deny them sleep. Inside the walls, Constantine XI knew the end was near. He rode through the city, speaking to his soldiers, thanking them for their courage. In the Hagia Sophia, Orthodox and Catholic clergy conducted a final joint service, the theological disputes temporarily forgotten in the face of doom. Citizens who had boycotted the church because of the union now filed in to pray. If this was the end, they would meet it together. Constantine delivered a final speech to his commanders. "The city is in danger of falling," he said, "according to contemporary accounts. But you, my lords and brothers and children, must not lose heart. Even if the walls fall, we must stand firm in our faith and in our defense of our people." He spoke of honor, duty, and the glory of dying in defense of their homeland and faith. That night, knowing death was likely imminent, Constantine walked through the great palace one last time, visiting the rooms where Byzantine emperors had ruled for over 1,000 years. He sought forgiveness from his household servants for any wrongs he had done them. Then he returned to the walls to await the dawn. At 1:30 a.m. on May 29th, Mehmed unleashed his final assault. This time, he committed everything. Waves of troops would hit the walls continuously until either they broke through, or he had no men left to send. First came the Boshi irregular troops considered expendable. They threw themselves at the walls in human waves, dying by the hundreds, but exhausting the defenders. Then came the better-trained Anatolian troops, who pressed the attack for hours. All along the walls, defenders fought desperately, but they were being ground down by sheer numbers and exhaustion. Finally, near dawn, disaster struck. Giovanni Giustiniani, the brilliant Genoese commander who had been the soul of the defense, was badly wounded by a projectile. He begged to be taken from the walls to have his wound treated. Constantine pleaded with him to stay. His departure would demoralize the defenders, but Giustiniani, in agony, insisted on leaving. His departure through the walls created a fatal moment of confusion. Some defenders, seeing their commander leaving, thought a retreat had been ordered. A gap appeared in the defenses at the crucial moment when Mehmed sent in his elite janissaries. The Sultan's household troops, a small group of janissaries, found a small gate, the Kirkaporta, that had been left unlocked or improperly secured. Accounts vary, but somehow they got through. Suddenly, Ottoman troops were inside the walls. They rushed to open larger gates, and Ottoman forces poured into the city. Constantine XI, seeing that all was lost, allegedly tore off his imperial regalia and plunged into the fighting. "The city is falling, and I am still alive," he reportedly cried. He was never seen again. His body was never definitively identified, though later Ottoman accounts claimed to have found a corpse in imperial purple beneath a pile of dead. The last Roman emperor disappeared into the chaos of Constantinople's final battle, dying like a common soldier in the city's defense. By mid-morning, it was over. Ottoman soldiers poured through the streets, and the promised 3 days of plunder began. Citizens fled to churches, hoping for sanctuary. The Hagia Sophia filled with terrified people praying for a miracle, but no miracle came. The doors were smashed open, and the great church symbol of Byzantine glory for 916 years was desecrated. Mehmed entered the conquered city on horseback that afternoon. Seeing a soldier trying to pry up marble slabs from the Hagia Sophia floor, he struck him with his sword. "The buildings are mine," he declared. "The plunder is yours." He ordered the great church converted into a mosque, and within days, the first Islamic call to prayer echoed from its ancient walls. The sack of Constantinople was brutal, but not as catastrophic as the 1204 Crusader sack. Mehmed, now called the Conqueror, actually worked to repopulate and rebuild the city. He would make it his capital, renamed Istanbul, and it would flourish again under Ottoman rule. Constantinople fell because it was too perfect. Its walls were so strong that its defenders became complacent. Its strategic position was so valuable that it became the inevitable target of every ambitious conqueror. Its religious and cultural pride was so deep that it couldn't make the compromises necessary for survival. Its historical invincibility was so legendary that its citizens couldn't believe the end could come until it was too late. The city had become trapped by its own magnificence. Every element of its perfection, its location, its walls, its faith, its history became a constraint that prevented adaptation. While Mehmed embraced new technology in the form of massive cannons, Constantinople relied on thousand-year-old walls. While the Ottomans unified their forces under a single, determined leader, the Byzantines remained divided by religious disputes and factional politics. While the Ottoman Empire expanded with the energy of a rising power, the Byzantine Empire clung to the fading glory of its past. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves through the world. In Western Europe, it was seen as a catastrophe, the final extinguishing of the Roman Empire that had endured in various forms for nearly 2,000 years. Greek scholars fleeing the conquered city brought ancient manuscripts to Italy, helping to spark the Renaissance. The Ottoman conquest shifted the balance of power in the Mediterranean and closed traditional trade routes, spurring Europeans to seek new paths to Asia, ultimately leading to the Age of Exploration and Columbus's voyage to the Americas. The city that had seemed eternal proved mortal after all. Its fall demonstrated that no fortress was impregnable, no empire invincible, no city divinely protected. It showed that past glory couldn't guarantee future survival, that reputation and tradition were no match for determination and innovation. Constantinople died of its perfection, because perfection is static, and the world demands change. The perfect city couldn't adapt, couldn't compromise, couldn't evolve. It became a museum of its own greatness, and museums, however beautiful, are filled with dead things. The ruins of Byzantine. Constantinople can still be seen in modern Istanbul sections of the Great Walls. The Hagia Sophia, ancient cisterns, fragments of palaces and churches. They stand as monuments to a city that was, for 1,000 years, the greatest in the world. They also stand as warnings that perfection can be a trap, that pride can blind, that even the mightiest can fall. The last words allegedly spoken by Constantine XI capture the tragedy perfectly. The city is falling, and I am still alive, even at the end. There was disbelief that Constantinople, eternal Constantinople, could actually die, but die it did, and the world changed forever. The fall of Constantinople reminds us that nothing lasts forever, that perfection can become paralysis, and that history's greatest turning points often hinge on moments of human courage and tragedy. If this story moved you, share it with others who love history's most dramatic moments. Subscribe now for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. What historical turning point should we explore next? Let us know in the comments.